Okay, get this. What if I told you that 2,000 years ago, right in southern India, there was this incredibly sophisticated, highly organized industry, and they were creating these little treasures that people all across the ancient world were desperate to get their hands on? Well, we're going to peel back the layers of time and uncover the secrets of this amazing lost craft.
So it all starts right here, with these. I mean, just look at the craftsmanship. They're tiny, they're polished, they're perfectly shaped beads made from precious stones. Archaeologists have dug up thousands of these things from old Sangam period settlements, and that hints at a scale of production that's, well, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around.
And yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Without any of our modern tools or fancy technology, how on earth did ancient artisans get this kind of precision? That's the exact mystery we're diving into today.
To start piecing this whole puzzle together, you got to look at what they were working with, the raw materials. And wow, it is quite a list. Yeah, we're not talking about simple clay or some average rocks here. We're talking carnelian. That's this gorgeous red, precious stone, sapphires, even diamonds and rubies. This wasn't just some backyard hobby. This was high art. They were using some of the most valuable materials you could find anywhere in the ancient world.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how in the world do we know any of this? How do you reconstruct a whole industry from 2,000 years ago? Well, historians and archaeologists are basically detectives, and they've been following two main trails of clues. Clues left behind in both the earth and in ancient texts.
So on one side, you've got archaeology, the actual stuff they left behind. And on the other, you have ancient Sangam literature, the poems and stories they wrote about their own lives. And the magic happens when you put those two together. Suddenly, this whole lost world just clicks into focus.
The ground itself has been talking to us. At sites like Kodumanal and Arikamidu, digs have turned up not just the finished beads, but the tools of the trade, even the furnaces they used. And sometimes, history just pops up out of nowhere. You'll have modern-day farmers just plowing their fields, and bam, they unearth these little ancient gems. And then there's the other half of the story, the literature. These ancient texts, like the Purananuru or Kurintogai, aren't just some dry, epic poems. No way. They're like a diary from the past, giving us a peek into what daily life was really like. They mention the people, the process, it's all in there.
And when you dig into those texts, you find something absolutely incredible. This wasn't a couple of artisans working on their own. This was a whole organized system, a guild with super specialized jobs. So, let's meet the team.
First up, you've got the Puhyar. The Patarti Patu song talks about them. Think of these folks as the prospectors, the scouts. Their whole job was to go out into the hills and forests to find and collect the precious raw stones. They were literally step one of the entire operation. All right, next in the production line were the Guruwar. We know from a poem called the Korantogai that they lived over on the west coast, and they were the arrangers. Their job was to sort all the beads, probably by quality, color, and size, getting them ready for trade. Then you had the Kujainar. Now this took some serious skill and a super steady hand. These were the people who pierced the tiny little holes through those hard stones. It was an incredibly delicate and, of course, absolutely crucial step. And at the very top of this guild, you had the Vanakan. This was the master craftsman, the expert, the one who cut the final shape, polished the bead to a perfect shine, and even dyed the stones to make their color pop. They made the final product absolutely perfect. And here's how we know just how important these masters were. The word Vanakan wasn't just a job title. You actually find it used in the names of famous poets of the time. That tells you everything, right? These master craftsmen weren't just seen as laborers. They were highly respected, celebrated figures. Basically, they were rock stars in their society, right up there with the best artists and scholars. Okay, so we've met the team. Now let's step inside their workshop and see how the magic actually happened. How did they turn a rough piece of stone into a polished little gem?
It was a super meticulous, multi-stage process. They'd start by just breaking the raw stone into smaller chunks. Then, and this is a really key step, they'd heat those rough chips in a sealed pot to get a brilliant, uniform color. After heating it, they'd carefully flake the stone into its final shape, and then a skilled kuyanar would drill the hole, and finally, the master Vanakan would give it that final beautiful polish.
So about that drilling, how did they pull that off? Well, their tools weren't long enough to go all the way through a bead in one go. So what do? They drilled from one side, then flipped the bead over and drilled from the other side, aiming to meet in the middle. And if you look really close at some of these ancient beads, you can see their little secret. The two holes don't always meet up perfectly.
It's a tiny little flaw that tells a huge story about their technology.
Now, all this incredible craftsmanship wasn't just for local folks to wear. This was way bigger. This was the engine of an international economy.
I mean, think about it. The sheer number of beads they found, the fact they had this whole specialized guild, it all points in one direction. They were making far, far more than they could ever need for themselves. This was production on an industrial scale, ancient style. And the ancient texts confirm it. There's this one line that tells us, the Gutuar, remember, the arrangers, lived really prosperous lives. And why? Because the Yavanas, a term they used for foreigners like the Greeks and Romans, were buying these beads. This was a global export business 2,000 years ago.
So when you put it all together, the evidence is undeniable. The bead makers of the Sangam period weren't just artisans. They were innovators and entrepreneurs. They were fueling a global demand for luxury goods and building a ton of wealth along the way.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If we can piece together a whole sophisticated industry like this from just a few fragments of poetry and some stones in the dirt, what other secrets of the ancient world are still buried out there, just waiting to be found?